Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the final day of Bridges to Success Equity Week webinar series. The pipeline to equity will close out this week, and presented by Miss Ayanna Shivers. And we'll get started with the presentation. A couple of housekeeping chores as usual. All attendees have been muted upon entry, so please do not unmute yourself. This presentation was pre-recorded, but the panelists will be available after the presentation for live questions at the end. Please use the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll go from that, those questions in the chat to ask questions of the panelists. And this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our webpage. So with that, we'll get started. Thank you all for coming.
Hello, my name is Angelette Pritchett with Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. Our equity project began a little over a year ago with a vision for addressing inequities and educational disparities for Missouri's citizens. The department's desire is to build a careful process for addressing inequities and to show our commitment toward equitable outcomes for all Missourians aligned with our vision to empower every Missourian with the skills and education needed for success. The Building Bridges series is an informative look at how Missouri's colleges and universities and community organizations are addressing equity. We hope that you learn from these shared experiences, and we thank you again for joining us.
Hello, my name is Dr. Yana Shivers, and I currently work with Lincoln University as their Assistant Director of Academic Support Services. Also, I teach in the School of Education and deal a lot with the field and clinical experiences of our students there. I'm pleased to be here. One of the things I do want to share a little bit about my background and why I'm excited about sharing today for the Education Equity Bridges to Success webinar series is I've been in K-12 education, or I was in K-12 education for about 18 years. During that time, I was able to serve in all types of learning environments, from inner city middle schools to affluent areas close to the coast, where I had students living on former plantations and they golfed, golf courses surrounded our school buildings. I've also taught in rural communities when I moved back to Missouri, and that's what I was most comfortable in. I was born and reared in Mexico, Missouri, and just recently, 6 years ago, moved back to the area. Currently, like I said, I'm at Lincoln now, and I'm passionate about making a difference and seeing that all people, all students have access, not only in the schools, but in various processes in the workforce and beyond. And so thank you today for allowing me to share a little bit about what we're doing specifically at Lincoln in the near future with our Regal Noise Grant. And with that, we'll begin what I call the pipeline to equity. All right. So for today's presentation, some of the things that we'll be talking about will be defining equity and equity as it pertains to education. We'll go a little bit about that. We'll also talk about the role of historically Black colleges and universities and the history of the Lincoln University, Missouri. And then we'll discuss some of the things specifically found in STEM education and STEM equity in the state of Missouri, and how the Noise Project at Lincoln University will be addressing many of those issues. So to get started, let's talk about what is the definition of equity. Often when I've been teaching, especially with pre-service teachers, and we talk about equality versus equity, a lot of people think they're the same. But as demonstrated in the illustration that I give, that I'm sharing, that I took from the Interaction Institute for Social Change, equality is sameness. It's one of the things that when we were going through the civil rights movement, a lot of times people were looking for equal rights, equal access to attend the same churches or the same movie theaters, go to the same schools. But when we talk about equity, it moves it into more of a social justice issue. And we're talking about fairness. And it's about making sure people get access to the same type of opportunities and understanding that those opportunities, in order to thrive in those opportunities, there may be different ways or different resources that are necessary for them to actually thrive. Okay, so when we're talking about equity in education, I like to think at the beginning of, during slavery, and when they started bringing Blacks from West Africa to the coast around 1619, it became access to education. A lot of times, Blacks, whether free or slave, weren't allowed to learn how to read and write and to go to school. So the equity or the problem was actual access to these institutions of learning. Having worked in inner cities and being at a Title I school, I learned that some schools, equity meant it was the finances. It was the finances of the parents and their abilities and what they could offer their children, as far as going back to that background and experiences that their students or their children were able to have and bring to the classroom. It was also the finances that were given to the institutions that sometimes impacted the number of qualified teachers or the abilities that they could offer their students. I remember being at my first school, Rivers Middle in Charleston, South Carolina, and our middle school didn't have an art class. It didn't have a choir. It didn't offer foreign languages because they didn't have the finances and the budget to do so. So my students often didn't have the same experiences that some of their peers just down the road in North Charleston, or even at some of the other schools, let's say in Mount Pleasant and the Charleston school districts, were afforded. Sometimes access is limited, or equity in education is limited by the location. Living in a rural environment, sometimes you don't have the same access or abilities that you might find in the cities or more urban areas. And so these are all things these were issues that I saw when I was in the K-12 environment, but I also noticed as I transitioned into higher ed that they exist there as well, because often the same problems of equity or inequities that we found in K-12 only grow, and you see them manifest itself more when those students actually make it to institutes of higher learning. And so the thing that we're going to start, this segues into what we're going to be talking a little bit about here, are HBCUs and the role that HBCUs play. And initially, like we said, go back to the initial role of the HBCUs. You started seeing them actually come into play around before the Civil War, actually, and it was to provide a space for Black students, particularly those that were free Blacks, to continue their education. And it was a way to address the current inequities of the time that existed. And after the Civil War, again, it was to allow them to have a space where they were safe to learn their history, to learn reading, writing. And when we look on the higher ed side of things, we start looking at the difference between providing industrial education, so the things such as agriculture and the technical fields, versus the more liberal arts education. And often that was seen in what we call the Booker T. Washington and the W.E.B. Du Bois debates, because Booker T. was the founder of Tuskegee Institute, and he was an advocate for industrial education. And often people who were only supporting industrial education, to some Black scholars, were actually demeaning and saying that they felt like they were saying that we could not, or Blacks weren't able to thrive and be a part of the system in anything other than that. Versus the W.E.B. Du Bois debate was talking about that talented 10th. So in 1823, the first Black person, Alexander L. Twilight, received a bachelor's degree in the United States from Middlebury College. Notice that it wasn't until 1837 in Cheney, Pennsylvania, that the first college for Blacks was actually started. And although it started in 1837, it wasn't until 1932 that it was able to become a degree granting university. Now, when we start looking at Missouri, we found that 1857 was the first Black college in the state of Missouri, which is now known as Harris-Stowe State University. And it was founded as a normal school back in 1857. And in 1860, Lincoln University was founded in Jefferson City. By 1870, there were 22 Black colleges in the United States, and we started seeing a gradual increase. It was also spurred in 1890 when the Morrill Acts extended to offer land grant opportunities to Black colleges, of which Lincoln University is one. I also found it interesting when I was doing a little more research that the term HBCU was created in the U.S. Higher Education Act of 1965 and refers to colleges that were founded prior to 1964 to serve Black students. Now what you start seeing a lot more in the dialogues are what we call minority serving institutions as well. So a little bit about the history of Lincoln University that's found in Missouri. And I put Lincoln University, Missouri, because there is a Lincoln University in Pennsylvania that is also an HBCU. So one of the things that we're really proud of at Lincoln is its history, which states that in 1866, Lincoln Institute was founded by members of the 62nd and 65th United Colored Infantry that fought at Fort McIntosh, Texas during the Civil War. I've always found it interesting that these gentlemen decided it was important to have a school back in their home, where many of them called home in Missouri, and some of them gave up a year's worth of their pay. And so in 1866, with about $5,000 from the 62nd and around, I believe it was $1,200, $1,400 from the 65th United States Colored Infantry on January 14th, 1866, Lincoln Institute was started. And that following September, it's had its first class actually start and attend. In 1870, the normal school, or the School for Teachers, was opened. And so this makes this year the School of Education's, its 150th anniversary. And so that's a celebration something we're really proud of and excited about as we're talking about equity in education with you today. In 1871, Lincoln moved to its current location, which is high on a hill in Jefferson City, and it really has a great view of what the town has to offer. In 1877, college work was actually added to the institution's curriculum, and therefore those who started graduating from the normal school were able to teach for life without anything further. In 1879 is when it became a part of the state system, and in 1890 it became a land grant institution. 1921 is when the first Black legislator, Walthall M. Moore, passed a bill in the Missouri legislation changing the name of Lincoln Institute and making it Lincoln University and creating its first board of curators to govern this body. And then, of course, in 1954, we celebrated the Brown versus Board decision, which opened up desegregated schools. And so at that point, no longer did Lincoln just accept African Americans. It was accepting anyone who met the criteria and wanted to attend. And now we get to what we really want to talk about today, and which is our Regal Noyce Grant. And the thing that we start doing with this is we first have to address equity in STEM and in STEM education. And so when I was doing some research, when I was beginning to write this grant, what I found is that in the United States, according to the National Science and Technology Council in 2018, STEM fields are in high demand. Occupations in the STEM fields are expected to increase by 8.9%. Unfortunately, there are not enough students who are adequately prepared to meet this need. And according to the ACT's 2018 data, 970,532 students in the United States convey that they were interested in a STEM field. However, only 5,839 were interested in having a career in STEM education. This is significant when research indicates the critical importance that a teacher can have on a student's outcome later in life. In other words, their ability to attract others into the field. And the research further went on to state that the U.S. government had developed a strategy based on its vision for a future. And in that report, it highlighted the fact that although half of the U.S. populations is comprised of women. Only 30% of the STEM jobs are held by them. In addition, underrepresented racial and ethnic groups, specifically African American and Blacks or Hispanic Latinos and American Indians, Alaska Natives, make up 27% of the population, but only 11% of the STEM workforce. And you'll see later, this is why the White House also included in its strategies and one of the emphasis of highlighting the role of HBCUs. It was part of that objective to promote excellent innovation at the HBCUs to help address this issue. So moving it a little closer to home, according to a 2019-20 teacher shortage report, Missouri had shortages in 45 areas, and 15 of the reported shortages were in STEM fields. And this was according to data that was shared by DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The 2015 report stated students in regions that did not have access to high school science teachers were at a disadvantage. And not only is Missouri suffering from teacher shortages, it also has very little diversity in the K-12 workforce. There was about 93.2% of the teachers were white, 5% Black, and 1% 8 others. And of those, 78% of the teachers were females. Now, what I wanted to really take note to, according to the 2010 census, its population in Missouri is 82.8% white, 11.6% Black, and 5.6% classify themselves as others. So this shows that there is a huge discrepancy when we're talking about the amount of people that look like the population in the schools who are actually teaching the populations in the school. This plan also talks a little bit later about the high school science was one of those areas with one of the highest numbers of not fully qualified teachers or those teaching out of their field. In order to address the issue that's at hand when we're talking about STEM education and the lack of people of color, people who are living in rural communities that are trying to access science or STEM degrees or even STEM courses, we came up with the Reaching Equity Goals at Lincoln. And this project is part of a NOIS grant, which I'll talk about a little bit later, which is utilizing a partnership with Lincoln University, Mobile Area Community College. We're proud to also partner with the following school districts: Jefferson City Schools, Kansas City Public Schools, and Mexico Public Schools, to make sure that we're recruiting minority populations and rural students as STEM majors. So when we talk about who, that's the who. Now we're going to talk about what is Regal. And it is actually a $1.45 million NSF, National Science Foundation NOIS grants that will last for 5 years. It was highly competitive. About 101 new applicants applied this year for funding, and it was about 20 of us that were actually funded. It's an effort or initiative by NSF to increase the number of STEM majors that teach in K-12. And so it's important that when we're looking at it, it is imperative for this, and it was also mandated that the college, that Lincoln, or anyone that receives this grant, has a partnership with the STEM department and the teaching department. So it's just not one or the other. It's realizing that the two have to work together in order to make this happen. And most importantly, it goes back to that idea is it's an effort to recruit and retain underrepresented populations as STEM educators, which we know is difficult to do, because when we're looking at underrepresented populations for the purpose of the grant, again, we're talking about rural as well as those who are high minority or come maybe first generation and have not had the opportunity. When does this happen? It started July 1st, 2020. So right now we're in that first year of the grant where we're building the resources, we're building capacity, we're working with our STEM advisory board, and we're getting ready for hopefully having our first cohort start September of 2021, August of 2021. And it will go through June 30th of 2025. And as stated before, it's going to be a part of Lincoln and its partners in subawardee. So how do we plan on doing it? The Regal NOIS Scholars Program is designed to address these issues by building the LU's foundation of graduating culturally relevant teachers for more than a century and creating a pipeline network utilizing districts Grow Your Own and its partnerships with Moberly Area Community College by implementing the following. So we're trying to do this understanding that we have a history here at Lincoln of graduating those culturally relevant teachers. And we're going to utilize something that we saw, or when I was doing research, we saw that grow your own programs had been very important and had a good success rate in Illinois. And what we were seeing in Missouri, that we were starting to see grow your own efforts to get more students or more districts to make sure that they have teachers who are going to be comfortable teaching in their schools, as well as staying instead of in a way as that, again, addressing that retention. So how are we doing it again? It's through the Regal Intern Program. Regal Interns are students who are considered freshmen. They have at least 20 hours behind them of college classes, or sophomores. And they would actually apply to do a summer intern where they would be paid $1,000 to do at least about 80 hours of work at one of our partnering school districts, or at a STEM location where they'll have an opportunity to do some type of teaching. Our Regal Scholars will be can be anyone who applies and meets the qualifications, which is simply at least an 18 on the ACT, a 2.75 GPA. You have to have be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. You have to agree to pursue a STEM field. Again, you have to have already obtained by the start of the semester 60 hours of college credit. If you meet those simple, and you also have to agree to be a part of what we call the Regal Summer Experience between your junior and senior college year. Then you can apply for the scholarship, and they are full rides each year, and it covers not only your tuition, but your cost of attendance. We're going to put together for those scholars what we call our Regal Support Network. And in that support network, they will be able to meet with not only a STEM advisor and their education advisor, but they'll be meeting as a group at least monthly. They'll be receiving training based on information that from a successful NSF grant that was conducted a few years ago by one of our other professors, will help in making sure that we have that support network. They will get the opportunity to also work with middle school and high school outreach programs. And so not only are they going to be exposed to ways of being able to teach, they're going to be actually working with students and getting to get early experience, something that we think is key. The Regal Summer Experience is going to take place in Kansas City, Missouri, because we realize that being in Jefferson City and that several of the students that may participate may be coming from a rural environment, that this gives them the opportunity to go and find out what it's like to be in an urban environment. And if they're perhaps given a job in an urban setting, they can also understand that they do have what it takes to be successful, and they won't be shocked that sometimes that shock that sometimes happens encourages pushes students sometimes, or teachers, first year teachers, second year teachers, not to return to a certain location. It also works the opposite way, because again, we're also recruiting Noise Scholars from Kansas City, and knowing that we can place them and give them opportunities in some of the rural environments that will help build their ability and confidence in reaching students that are maybe from a different cultural environment they did not grow up in. We also have our STEM Advisory Board. This is the one part of the grant that is already in operation, and it's made up of members of our partnering districts, as well as right now MoDOT, and we're getting some other STEM organizations, businesses that are interested in sharing in helping us advise what we should be teaching our teachers. Hopefully helping us provide us with some different resources and activities that we can put before our Regal Scholars to help prepare them for success in the real world. We're also doing an annual STEM conference focusing on STEM education at Lincoln. And so my co-PIs, Dr. Amy Bosalaki and Caitlin Schwartz, will be spearheading that initiative each year, starting in 2021-2022 school year, as well as parent workshops in the Jefferson City School District in order to sort of gauge why aren't students going into STEM. Because according to a Pew report or Gallup survey, a lot of our students, as according to public opinion, and this was in about 2018, and indicated that about 54% of parents surveyed indicated that they would not want their children to become public school teachers. And as a result, this negative perception of the education profession has increased 24% since 2009. And so we know that we need to see, what can we do to help inform parents and the bodies to make sure that people see education as a career. And then why are we doing this? We have 4 main goals with the Regal Project. And the 4 main goals include increasing the number of STEM majors graduating from Lincoln University and teaching in K-12 classrooms. The second goal is to assist grow your own programs in Jefferson City, Kansas City, and Mexico, Missouri, in developing STEM majors to return to their respective hometowns and teach. 3 is to promote STEM as a viable career field for underrepresented populations. And 4 is to construct an inquiry-based, culturally responsive curriculum that can be integrated into undergraduate STEM and teacher preparation programs, as well as be a part of ongoing professional development. And I do want to say with this part of the program, one of the things that we're doing, we'll be working with a content expert in this field to work side by side with our faculty, especially in STEM and education departments, but school, university-wide as well, if others wants to join into it. And so we're contracting with Dr. Amani Goffney out of University of Maryland with that. And she has done a lot in the field with math. And so the last couple of items that I do want to share, and this goes straight from the grant, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but it talks about the intellectual merit of this. And it's talking about how we're recognizing that STEM majors cannot adequately serve high-need school districts without the training and pedagogy that addresses cultural diversity at all levels. And that is what we're really trying to do. And by using the discourse that has been written about grow your own programs and partnering with various school districts with dual credit offerings in community colleges, we're creating that pipeline of STEM majors. I didn't get to talk too much, but I want to say about this pipeline, like we said, we know that in Missouri, we offer the A+ program. So we feel by having these connections with the 3 school districts, all of which are A+ districts, that their students have the opportunity, like we were talking with one of the assistant superintendents in Kansas City, and they have students who are already graduating with associate degrees. Ideally, those students could apply and get into our first cohort and essentially graduate with their degree and with not having to pay for anything. So a free degree in STEM education. And it could work very similarly whether or not you graduated with an associate's or if you go to one of our partners like MACC and utilize your A+ program, this can make this a very viable pipeline. The good news is each of our districts that we're partnering with are guaranteed a certain number of slots in each cohort. Our first cohort, like we said, will start in 2021. So August of 2021 will be a cohort of 8. And then we'll have 2 more cohorts of 12 that will be in the subsequent years. And then ideally, if we need to, we can award the scholarship to seniors, but we're hoping that we can award and retain juniors who will stay as seniors, and we'll graduate them over that program, which is why we'll only have the 3 cohorts, thinking that ultimately the final cohort will be completing that final year. And maybe if we're lucky, we'll be able to reapply for subsequent NOIS funding that we can keep the program going. And then, of course, the main thing about the entire project is that broader impact and the fact that based on the initiatives that have been set by the United States government in addressing STEM inequities that are found not only in education, but within minority populations and in rural populations, we're actually going to be adding to that discourse, and we'll be addressing it right here in Missouri at Lincoln University. And for this, we're very excited. And so I'm looking forward to what the next 5 years will be as we're addressing STEM equity and adding to the discourse of grow your own and being able to offer this right here in Missouri. And so if anyone has questions or would like to talk to me about the Regal project or anything that we've discussed, here's my contact information. Thank you for letting me share.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Getting to any questions, I don't believe I see any questions in the chat. I'll give a couple minutes if anyone on the call wants to say something with the, wants to ask a question. Oh, here we go. Ms. Shivers, can you put your contact information again in the chat? Oh, here we go. And if you could put your contact information in the chat, thank you. And another question here, Ms. Shivers, is let me pull this up here. Oops, there we go. Will the grant address barriers related to food, transportation, etc.?
All right, so one of the ways that we're trying to address those barriers is when our scholarship recipients will get the cost of attendance. And so that takes in consideration that there's other things related to attending college besides tuition and housing that need to be taken into consideration. We've incorporated in that grant as well monies for transportation to the various places and that sort of thing as well.
Cool, great, thank you. Next question is, do program participants have the opportunity to go on for their master's degrees in education?
Well, they would have a bachelor's, so there would be nothing that would prevent them. We're hoping that we can also, the good thing about NSF and the NOIS grants, there's different tiers. We did a tier 1 grant. And so that's specifically for bachelor's programs, but there's some that you can do that will help for people to help become master teachers and those sort of things. And so we're hoping if that we're successful in this first round, that perhaps we can go for some other fundings to continue on.
Cool, great. Thank you for putting your email address in there for the commenter who wanted that. Oh, and she also has her cell phone number as well. Cool. Thank you so much, Ms. Shivers. Really appreciate it. Let's see, any other questions from the team? I don't see any other questions at the moment. Oh, here we go. Are there courses that offer exposure to planning and design, broader understanding of physical and I guess the political impacts to community that could be of value?
All right, so we're hoping to embed in our program, one of the things that we talked about was having that culturally relevant inquiry-based curriculum and teaching ways to help others understand how to address students as well as their peers. I'm not quite sure if that's what he's talking about. We do a lot of that. We're going to continue to implement that sort of information into, let's say, our techniques in teaching and that sort of courses that are also already there. Embed them more so is what I'm trying to think. We're trying to embed those.
Cool, great, thank you. And the commenter, if you want to, oh, you said things, I guess that answered the question. Cool, so thank you so much. Another question here, does Lincoln have a continuity plan to continue the program past the expiration date of the grant?
Of course, the plan is, I know when I was writing the grant, you don't want to have something that's just 5 years and it's done. The hope, the prayer is that one, we're successful, we'll be able to receive more monies, but it's also that we will empower the districts around us with their grow your own initiatives and creative ways in which we can start finding funding. And I think once you're successful, you see that there are entities out there that will be willing to help support these type of things. And so we're trying to put something in place. We've already started. I saw a couple of my saw at least one of my co-PIs on here earlier, Dr. Busalaki. We've already started our manual. So things that we're doing can be replicated because we think that's part of having that advisory board. It's a part of having a manual and putting things in place. So you want it to be able to be replicated because we're not all going to be here always.
Great. Just a quick question. Are there any other HBCUs that have similar programs that you did research on or that you know of in this space?
I do not know. I'm sure there are that, that might have something similar. I don't know how many have the Noise grant. It's I know they're welcome to do it and apply. Matter of fact, it's one of the things that NSF has an initiative to have more minority serving institutions and HBCUs to try to help address these inequities in STEM, especially as K-12 educators. But again, it's one of those things that it takes a lot of time to, write those grants and hopefully, to support it.
Another question just came through. Are there existing employer partnerships for student externships and experimental learning?
That's one of the things that we're working on building with our internships for this one part that you may have heard me say about the summer internships that we're going to be offering. We're partnering with those school districts, and we've asked them to also think of their partners in the communities that we can utilize and build those partnerships to offer. So we can provide, like we say, we'll give them $1,000 to do an 80-hour internship. So they'll know that they're getting paid. So, you know what I mean? So it's a way to hopefully encourage people to utilize these interns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is actually a good question. You mentioned this in your presentation, which I found interesting. Any thoughts about why parents are not interested in their children becoming public school teachers? I thought that was an interesting piece of that uptick in feeling that it's not a good field to go into, and yet it's the school teachers who teach their children to get the degrees. So that was kind of interesting.
Right. So I think it has a lot to do with what the media puts out. You hear all these things about what goes on in a classroom, especially in our public classrooms. We hear about, the disrespect that goes on. We hear about the issues that students come to schools with. And I think, when you're a parent, you're thinking for your child, oh, well, I don't want my child to go into a field when they're going to do this. And then we all know that teachers get paid tons of money. I say this laughing, right? And so, you think about it. So for a lot of our students, they think, okay, I want to go get a STEM degree. I can make 10 times, well, maybe not 10 times as much. I can make quite significantly more if I'm an engineer or if I'm a doctor. They don't tell you, they forget to factor in some of the benefits of being an educator. Like I always say, I love the job when I don't have to go to work in the summers and I have my Christmas breaks and some other perks I don't think a lot of times we share enough about. We forget to, I think sometimes as teachers and educators, we don't talk about the joy we have when you connected or you see a student growing and develop, and knowing that you played some small part in it. And those are things that you can't place, any, monetary values and stuff. And so I think that's where we're seeing that just society sort of does that to it.
Just to follow up on that, other question here, a little bit off topic, but do you have ideas about what can be done about the declining attitudes that parents have regarding their kids becoming teachers?
Funny you should say that. Actually, that was one part that I placed in ours, is offering some type of parent workshops. And I actually did that with my doctoral studies. But trying to get them involved and seeing that they're getting those images, using our social media, providing the information and really actually talking. I think parents, they just want what's best for their children. And I think sometimes as educators, we don't PR ourselves enough and about the value, because a lot of times, they want to hear about the teacher who just, that day you're having a bad day and you say, I hate my job. That's the part they hear, but they don't talk about 4 other days that week that it was amazing, you know. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any other information. There was a comment that was just placed by Miss Leanne Taylor Knight about the DeBruce Foundation. I guess there's a webinar coming up about that. So that's something that commenter had that could be possible for people to join. Have you any experience with that? Have you heard anything about that, Ms. Shivers? Or
I had not, so I'm going to look into it.
Cool, great. It's making connections. That's awesome. Cool.
Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all the questions I see at the moment. Thank you all for joining. Thank you also, Ms. Ayanna Shivers. Thank you so much for being with us. We really do appreciate it. Wonderful presentation, wonderful way to wrap up the whole week. And please, we'll have these, everything, and we'll have all of our presentations and so forth. I'm sure we'll put it on our website when we can at a later date. So be looking out for that. Look at our website. But thank you again, Ms. Shivers, for answering the questions. Thank you for the questions. And we hope you have a good weekend. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Great day.
You too. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.